So now we're going to be looking at the Persianization of Alexander the Great. What I know is he started dressing in terms of like Persian customs. He took a foreign wife. I think a big part is how the Persians and the people of the East like actually revered him as a god, like would bow to him, almost like to like a deity in a sense, you know. While the Macedonians slash Greeks, I don't believe they ever bowed to other humans, and Alexander wanted absolute power, absolute control, absolute like worship and adoration, and some of the Greeks weren't like that. So, I don't think the Greeks were like that. So, like, when they saw this all, they were like, what's going on with you? Why are you like doing this? And this was a huge source of conflict. So yeah, those are some of the aspects Alexander took on. Persian customs. I'm looking forward to seeing more. So let's get to it. Without any further ado, let's watch the Persianization of Alexander the Great.
Alexander of Macedon's conquest of the Achaemenid Persian Empire is one of the single most famous campaigns in world history, and was ultimately responsible for spreading classical Greek culture as far east as India. However, as Alexander seeded the culture of the Hellenes throughout Iran and Central Asia, so too did the ancient and sophisticated cultures of those regions influence him. From events like the proskynesis at Bactria to Alexander apparently dressing up in the Persian fashion, many have wondered just how Persianized Alexander became, with some even postulating that he became so nativized that he became a Zoroastrian, an adherent of the faith of the Achaemenid Persian kings. To find out whether or not there is truth in this, we must examine how Alexander engaged with the conquered peoples of Persia, and how he went about consolidating his rule. Welcome to our video on Alexander and the Persians, their relationship, and how Alexander engaged with Zoroastrianism. Winning an empire might be hard, but keeping it is. Before we analyze Alexander in Persia, we must first understand how Persian kingship was linked to Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a dualistic religion focused on the great lord Ahura Mazda, his emanations, the Emesha Spentus, and their fight against the great lie, Angra Mainyu, and his emanations, the Ahuras. The traditional title of the Achaemenid monarch, Shahenshah, or King of Kings, was intrinsically linked to Zoroastrianism. Most Achaemenid kings throughout history were probably practicing Zoroastrians in one way or another, although some paid homage to other religions too. The Cylinder of Cyrus the Great, for example, mentions the Babylonian god Marduk. Darius the Great most certainly used Zoroastrianism, exalting Ahura Mazda and all the gods. Overall, while the Achaemenid Empire was relatively tolerant and regional satraps often cooperated with local religious authorities, Persian kingship was linked to Zoroastrianism. Consequently, Persepolis, the imperial capital, was a center of Persian religion, whose Apadana Palace has reliefs of tribute-giving nations to the King of Kings. One of the tablets from Persepolis shows the interplay of universal monarchy and Zoroastrianism. Darius, the great king, king of kings, king of countries, son of Hystaspes, an Achaemenid. King Darius says, "This is the kingdom which I hold, from the Sake, who are beyond Sogdia, to Kush, and from Sind to Lydia. This is what Ahura Mazda, the greatest of gods, bestowed upon me. May Ahura Mazda protect me and my royal house." Indeed, every aspect of Persian kingship was intrinsically linked to Zoroastrianism, with royal clothing and diadems present in many pictures. Achaemenid kings also demanded tribute and submission in a highly ritualized manner, while royal ideology intrinsically sought the approval of Ahura Mazda, which served as a sign of the overlordship over the Persian Empire. It is this deeply rooted tradition of Zoroastrian kingship that Alexander encountered while conquering his way through Asia. As the young Macedonian king's empire grew massive, he found himself having to balance his objectives between his many diverse subjects outside of his Macedonian heartland. For the southern Greek city-states, he was a pan-Hellenic leader who was supposed to enact revenge on the Persians for their invasion of Greece a century earlier. Meanwhile, in the Achaemenid Empire, he had two other groups to manage: the local elites of countries like Egypt, Babylon, Bactria, and India, who had been peripheral foreign vassals to the Persians, as well as the Persian elites themselves, who were traditionally much more invested in the Achaemenid kingship that Alexander had deposed. The balance between Greeks and Persians is particularly important, as the former made up the army he had conquered Persia with, and the latter his collaborators in helping rule the land he had conquered. All these groups influenced his choices going forward. Alexander's technique of rule usually was to appeal to local sensibilities. In this manner, he was no different to many Persian emperors. In Egypt, he presented himself as pharaoh and a liberator, while in Babylon, he conducted sacrifices in the great temples there. In short, he was not afraid to adopt local customs. This was something regional satraps of the late Achaemenid Empire had also done, particularly ones who worked with the local ruling elites. These actions established the allegiance of the local populations, a famous example being the Jews of Jerusalem, who were generally receptive to their Persian and later Macedonian governors' tolerance towards their monotheistic faith. In peripheral territories like Egypt, Babylon, and Judah, Alexander generally had little trouble establishing legitimacy to rule, as it was simply a matter of replacing one foreign overlord with another. However, in Persia proper, establishing that legitimacy was more complicated. Alexander had to both show that he was superior to the late Achaemenid king Darius, but also that he was a friend of both Greeks and Persians. To that end, when Alexander won the Battle of Issus, he is said to have treated Darius's wife, Statera, with utmost respect. Alexander also adopted many traditional pillars of Persian royal symbolism. For example, the use of the royal tent of the Persians, which had once allowed Achaemenid kings to travel their vast lands with mobility while also displaying their symbolic wealth and prestige. Moreover, Persian bodyguards were incorporated by Alexander. Historical accounts by Plutarch call these bodyguards melophori, or apple bearers. The Achaemenids once used that very same institution as an assisting force to the infamous 10,000 immortals. In addition, the Persian King of Kings was meant to be isolated and communication to be done via messengers. This was so that his subjects would not have much contact with him, and that the king could maintain an allure of supremacy. As time went on, Alexander made more use of these methods to appeal to his Persian and Bactrian subjects. There was also the habit of proskinesis, of bowing and prostrating oneself before the king. Many Greeks saw these acts of ostentation as a deification of Alexander and protested against its use.
It's the culture clash / shock. I think Alexander really did want... I had heard that, like, a story that Alexander actually wanted some of his Greek subjects to actually bow like his Persian subjects, and they were like, no. I think Alexander, the thing is that Alexander obviously had a huge ego. You know what I mean? I think he actually bought a lot of what they were saying. You know, you're the son of a god, you are like a deity, you know, like, I think he really bought into that, and like, because it fluffed up his ego. And, like last video, when he killed Cletus, you know, the Black, what cheered him up, what I found a little jarring and a little frightening, what cheered him up is that when he was comforted by saying, well, you're like the son of a god, you're a deity yourself, you're above the laws of man, and that cheered him up, like, you get me? Like, I feel like he wanted that, and I feel like since the Persians were definitely fluffing up his ego and, you know, encouraging / enabling that view of himself, he wanted everyone, even the Greeks, to start being like that, I think, to some degree. And so there comes the problem when the Greeks are like, we don't want to do that, we're not gonna do that, you know? again, like I said, if Alexander had lived longer, just how would he have merged these cultures? How would he have done it? Like, how would it have gone? Like, there's so much what ifs, I feel, from what Alexander would have done, you know?
Evidently, these protests were heated when in 327 BCE, Alexander excused his Greek troops from performing the Persianized court theatrics he had adopted. Overall, the Greeks, even ones who lived under monarchies like the Macedonians, were much more conservative about projections of royal power, which was why they considered Alexander's adoption of Persian court practices to be an attempt at vain deification. However, contrary to that viewpoint, it seems Alexander was simply utilizing Persian institutions and practices to ensure the loyalty of his new Iranian subjects. Let us now move on to the treatment of Zoroastrianism by Alexander, and how this relates to his ideas of kingship. Alexander appears to have been politically savvy in his engagement with the Persian religion. In particular, in his alleged correspondence to his archenemy, Darius, he prefers to use the name King of Asia, while addressing Darius as Great King. This suggests that he was seeking a title far grander than King of Kings. According to the account of Arrian, his reply to one of Darius's letters reads as follows: "But now I have defeated in battle first your generals and satraps, and now you in person and your army, and by the grace of the gods I control the country. All those who fought on your side and did not die in battle but came over to me, I hold myself responsible for them. They are not on my side under duress, but are taking part in the expedition of their own free will. In future, whenever you communicate with me, send to me as King of Asia. Do not write me as an equal, but state your demands to the master of all your possessions. If not, I shall deal with you as a wrongdoer. If you wish to lay claim to the title of king, then stand your ground and fight for it. Do not take to flight, as I shall pursue you wherever you may be." We can thus see that Alexander, while emulating the custom of the King of Kings, was aiming to create his own royal ideology. By making himself grander than Darius, Alexander was becoming a universal monarch, with claims not just on Persia, but the entire world beyond. This can be seen in his regalia. Although inspired by previous Persian designs, Alexander's dress and diadem when he became ruler of Persia was meant to visually inspire a new, even grander form of rulership. An interesting case study of Alexander's relationship to Zoroastrianism can be seen in Persepolis, where the Macedonian conqueror is well known to have been courteous to Cyrus's tomb at Pasargadae, which had allegedly fallen into disrepair. While we don't know why the tomb had been neglected, we know that Alexander had demanded it be restored to its full glory, and also that the priests who neglected it be tortured. However, Alexander was also known to have suppressed Zoroastrianism in certain instances as well. For example, he allegedly broke a lot of Persian religious artifacts in Persepolis itself, which has been interpreted as his attempt to assert the Greek gods as the chief religion of the realm, thereby displacing Zoroastrianism. It is also claimed that after conquering Persepolis, Alexander staged a banquet to celebrate his victories. There, a prostitute called Thais challenged the drunken conqueror to avenge the burning of the city of Athens, which occurred over a century ago. Alexander agreed and invited his army to join him, burning Persepolis to the ground. Later Zoroastrian sources claim that he did this deliberately to burn one of the two golden copies of the Avesta, the Zoroastrian holy text. This is why in Zoroastrian sources from Sasanian times, centuries later, Alexander is seen as an agent of the Great Lie, who destroyed the great empire of the Iranians. To many historians,
Okay, so later Sasanian sources also call him the accursed, but we are not sure how much of this is Sasanian anti-Byzantine propaganda. The sources themselves are Zoroastrian, or by Zoroastrian clergy.
Alexander's anti-Persian policies were an attempt to earn the legitimacy of his Greek soldiers by enacting revenge for Xerxes' invasion of Greece a century earlier, thus showing that he was a monarch of many faces, adopting Persian rights while settling Hellenic blood feuds. Indeed, Alexander granted tolerance to all religions of the empire, and actively sought to incorporate himself within them. For example, Arab tribes in the south were said to worship two gods, and Alexander declared that they should worship him as a third god. In Gantara, he identified local deities, most likely Vasudeva and Rudra, with Heracles and Dionysos respectively. In short, Alexander was not looking to eradicate Zoroastrianism, but merely replace it as the chief religion of Persia with the gods of the Greeks, Zeus, Heracles, Athena, Dionysos and Apollo. The Zoroastrian faith, however, persisted alongside other faiths and continued to hold a decreased, albeit still important role in Hellenic-era Persian society. Alexander has been called the last of the Achaemenids by historian Pierre Briand due to his continuation of many Achaemenid policies, evident in the fact that he engaged with Persian elite networks, like any Achaemenid king would, and also used the administrative networks that the Achaemenids themselves used to run their empire. We have spoken previously on the imperial bureaucracy of the Achaemenids, and Alexander utilized it rather efficiently. Many Persian satraps maintained their control of some of their territories, so long as they pledged allegiance to Alexander. However, Alexander also added many Macedonian satraps and split up the power amongst multiple rulers in one region. Alexander sought this appeal to ensure continuity and stability of the revenue streams of the empire to his coffers. Not all Persians accepted the new rulers. Bessus, the assassin of Darius, had proclaimed himself his successor and had fled to Bactria. Alexander is said to have been made successor by Darius in his dying words, but this is at best fanciful speculation. Alexander chased the competitor throughout the mountains and valleys of Central Asia, often conducting brutal repression upon the locals. The Bactrians were never easy to control by the Achaemenids and were no fans of the new arrivals. Alexander often conducted brutal sieges in cities, as he had in Tyre, and in the case of the city of Branchide, massacred the entire population. It is here that we must also consider the presence of both Persians and women in Alexandrian politics. Persian troops accompanied Alexander loyally in his campaigns, but appear to have been separate from the Greek troops. This suggests
Initially, it does seem that the Persians were separate, but it seems that they got blended in more over time. Persians were eventually included in the ranks of the companions, for instance. And that's another big issue I heard regarding the Macedonians and Alexander. He was allowing Persian troops, training them in the phalanx, and, they even horsemen, Persian horsemen. It's just like, you see what Alexander is doing. He's trying to mold everything into one to create this cultural empire, and he never got fully around to fully implementing his ideas. I wonder how much successful he would have been had he been given more time in life. But you do see that this was going to be a big problem. Reconciling the Greeks with the rest of the world seemed like it was going to be a lifetime adventure for Alexander,
suggests that Alexander still had to balance between Greek and Macedonian interests. However, he still thought that many Persians should have a Greek education. Macedonian royalty, with its equestrian and hunting-friendly attitude, allowed for some ease with the integration with Persian nobles, who espoused similar values. Alexander's mindset is best exemplified in the Susa weddings, where Greek soldiers married Persian women. Alexander also married Roshanak, or Roxane, or Sogdiana, as a convenient marriage alliance and reconciliation with the rebellious Sogdians. It also enabled a sort of conquest, as the sexist ancient world saw the conquest of the women of the enemy as a symbol of victory.
Okay, 80 companions have married Median, Persian, Sogdian, and Bactrian women in this mass wedding.
Most of these weddings ended in divorce, with one notable exception. Seleucus, one of Alexander's most trusted comrades, maintained his marriage to Apama of Sogdiana, and followed in his friend's footsteps in maintaining links with the Persian nobility. He would later found the Seleucid Empire, which ruled over Persia. Alexander's policy shows that he tried to engage with all political actors in the empire, from Greeks to Persians to Bactrians. Links with Persian nobility and Zoroastrianism were strong in terms of maintaining continuity. Yet Alexander also showed the triumph of Hellenism through acts of defilement of previous Persian heritage. Many Greek sources see this as barbarizing, yet we can also see that this was a careful political strategy, possibly inspired by Persian kingship itself. Alexander the Great certainly became more Persian throughout his campaigns, preserving and adopting the customs and networks of the King of Kings. Alexander engaged with the Persian nobility and even attempted to connect them to the Greeks through the Susa weddings. However, Alexander also had to engage with the Hellenic part of his army, and certainly aimed to install a new order as King of Asia. This is perhaps the most intriguing part of Alexander's vision, the inability to be put in a specific label or a box. Alexander's vision of conquest was his own, but it was inseparable from the Persian ideas of universal monarchy and pan-Hellenic martial values. It is this ideology that changed both Greece and Persia forever, and ushered the vibrant Hellenistic age. More videos on the Hellenistic age are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider.
Alright, so yeah, some of that I was fully aware of, though what he was trying to do with creating this religious order was also super interesting, I find. Overall, yeah, like I said, I just wish, this is the most interesting part about Alexander. I wish we had seen his longer term visions carried out, and how successful he would have been or not in what he was trying to do, Like, I kind of do wish we had seen that in life, but oh well. So yeah, I'm going to be jumping back to the Alexander's Conquest series when we talk about his time in Afghanistan. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye everyone.